Everyone, welcome back. Today we're using Blender to make our first product design. The first tutorial will be a simple product design. The next tutorial will be an animation of your design. So it's basically like a free course. Now, I'm assuming that you already have Blender downloaded and you've got it loaded on your screen and you're ready to follow this tutorial. Let's start with the general file. Once we start with the general file, the first thing that I like to do is to actually save the document. Please save your document, save it in a specific file. So I've just saved my file. Now let's begin. So this is our environment. As you well know, I'm assuming that you're at least an intermediary designer or an intermediary skill with Blender. But if you are a beginner, you can also follow along. So first we're going to press Shift A and let's add a circle. Let's press Tab in. Once we tab in, we can extrude this along the Z axis. We can extrude it upwards. Now if you press Alt, select the vertices at the bottom, the loop cut at the bottom, we can fill that face. And there we go, it's filled. Now with everything selected, you can press A to select everything, G and Z to move this upwards. Reason I want to move it upwards is because I can press steer on our number pad, select face view, and then we can simply insert this face, and we can insert once again, and we can press G and Z to move this upwards just a little bit, just to give it a bit more of a detail. We can go back to the top. Let's select this loop, but we need number 2 on our number pad. Select the top loop cut. Fantastic. So let's press F to fill that face. Then we can insert this face and insert once again, and then press E and Z to move up. And it's a similar process all throughout. We can press E and Z to extrude once again, and we can even move this in just a little bit. E and Z just to move up once again and bring this in just a little bit. Now you can press G and Z and bring this down if you'd like. It's up to you in how you'd like to design this product to be specific. But I'm going to keep on inserting my faces, and then I can essentially just drop this down. We can have something rather simple, kind of like that. And all I'm doing is simply just extruding and inserting just to create some basic shapes. And at the end of the day, you know, it's really up to you with how you'd like your design to be. But we need a cap. So if we press face select, we want to select this edge loop at the top right there. And then we can duplicate and right click. And then we can press P and simply separate this. Tab out and click on the new piece that has been made. If we tab back in, then we can start extruding these edge loops. Press number 2 on our number pad, select this edge loop and extrude, but we want to extrude upwards. There we go. This is looking quite interesting. Then we can press F to fill that face. Same thing with the next edge loop. Extrude this upwards by pressing E and Z to extrude upwards. And it is really that simple. We can even extrude it once more. Press S to scale this in and F to fill the face. And then we can probably just add some edge loop. We can either add that at the top, add it at the bottom. I'm going to add an edge loop at the bottom, and then I'm going to press Control B to bezel, and this is looking quite good. So if we bezel that and we look at these faces, you can see we've got 3 faces. And if I want this face on the inside, and then we can simply scale this in a sense. We can scale this in simply by pressing S. And we just want to sort of give it some details. Now with the other edge loops, we can bring these downwards. You can see it's quite a big gap. So we can even bring these downwards. So we can press G and Z, drop this down a little bit, select the other edge loop, G and Z, and we can bring this upwards just a little bit, just to add a little bit of a detail. And these objects are separated. So let's select this object at the top, G and Z, and just move it upwards just a little bit. We don't want it to be completely attached, so we just want to give it a little bit of a detail, you know. So that's what we have so far. We have our product. Now, if you'd like, you can actually add bezel modifiers to this product. You can go to the right hand side to modifiers, you can go to add modifiers, go to general, and add a bezel to this detail. And we can add, different amount of segments, probably around 4 segments. With the amount, we can add it around 15. Then you can shade smooth. Let's see how this looks. It actually doesn't look too bad, if I'm being completely honest. Same thing with the one below with the entire container. Add another bezel modifier. You can try 15 again, you can try 20, it's up to you. Whatever works for you. You can try 5 in terms of segments. You can see that leaves a bit of a gap right there. So if I had less segments, you can see the detail gets a little bit rough. But with some more segments, it really does help. But too many segments and it basically doesn't help at all. So around 4 or 5 is really the sweet spot. You don't really need the amount, you don't really need a lot either. Around 15 or probably around 12 will do just fine. And of course, this is shade smooth. So if I tab in and I wanted to, get this a little bit more sharp, the top loop. If I wanted to get this a bit more sharp, I can add an edge loop and I can bring this upwards and it can just sort of sharpen it out. But I've got to be careful with that, because if I'm not careful, it might change the entire design, which is really weird. So if you don't want to add an edge loop, what you could do is add an edge loop on the interior around here. And this might help to sharpen it out just a little bit without affecting our overall design. So from a distance, it still looks fantastic. It actually looks better than fantastic. And that's really the effect that we're going for. To better some of these details, if you look underneath, you can see that looks a little bit flawed. It's still a little bit rough. The bezel and the shade smooth hasn't made it look the best. It's improved it, but it could look better. We can add a subdivision modifier by pressing Ctrl+2 on our number pad. That's added our subdivision modifier with level 2 in the viewport and render in 2. Now be careful, because on our right hand side you can see that the bezel modifier is at the top, the subdivision is below. Now if you move the subdivision above, it messes up our design almost entirely. It almost like it turns it into a baby bottle essentially. So we don't want that, do we? So let's keep that below. Let's just keep it professional, and that looks good. That looks super good. And we can do the same thing with the one at the top. Ctrl+2, and it just refines the entire design. Look at how smooth that is. That looks like something that a client would be happy to pay you for. So this is our basic product. Now I'd like to have a little bit of an environment, if you get what I mean. So let's press Shift A and add a plane, and let's just say I want to scale this plane up probably around by 20. That's pretty good. We don't want to do too much. Save your document once again. I'm obsessed with saving my documents. I can't get enough of it. You've lost a document before and it's just really annoying. Press number 1 on our number pad. When I'm designing my products, this is how I like everything to look. If I turn on the show gizmo, this is what my gizmo looks like. I press number 1. If I press number 3, this is what my gizmo look like. I get the green line and the blue line. I like to design from the front. This is what I consider as the front, which is number 1 on my number pad. This is with the red line and the blue line. This is what I like to design as, but it's up to you. It's your preference. Now what I'll go ahead and do, we actually have our plane, so that's good. Let's press Shift A and let's add another circle. And with this circle, we can scale this up by 5. That's perfect. Well, we think it's perfect. Let's tab in. Let's press F to fill. And let's extrude outwards. This is fantastic. Let's extrude outward once again, and let's scale this platform inwards. This is what we'll be working with so far. So even with this one, we can add a bezel modifier if you'd like. You don't have to, but you could. It's really up to you. You really don't have to, but you could add a bezel modifier and a subdivision. And this is what it really looks like. If you wanted to sharpen out these edges, you can tab in and add a loop cut, and it really does sharpen out these edges in a nice way. With this face right here, I have a feeling if we inserted it, it would probably look even better. There we go. It sort of looks better. I'm not too sure if that looks as good as I want it to look. I think it could still do with some improvement. So if we tab in once again, we add another edge loop, but this time probably down below at the object. What about if we add an edge loop up here? Now you see that already sort of changes the shape of our object, but it's mostly about details that I'm concerned with. So you don't necessarily have to have these edge loops. It's more of a preference, you know, but it sometimes help to get a bit more detail. And as you can see, the render and the viewport in the subdivision, it doesn't really change much. We can start adding some more details to our environment. Let's press Shift A on our number pad, and this time we want to create sort of like an archway. So perhaps a plane would do. And let's press S, let's press 4, scale it up to 4, and let's rotate this R and X to rotate, and press 90 on our number pad. We get 90 degrees. And let's press G, Z, and move this up. G and Y to move this backwards. And from here, number 1 on our number pad, we can even move this up just a little bit more. And then we could press S and Z to sort of scale this out, move it up a little bit more. Okay, we want to sort of create an archway. Now, I can't even remember how to do this, but I'm just going to start with these 2 loop cuts. These 2 vertices at the top. Select these 2 vertices. If you want, you can press Alt-Z to go into X-ray mode, making sure that your bottom vertices are not selected, only the top vertices. Press Ctrl-B and V, and then you get this. Now, that will look a little bit more like a archway, if I'm being completely honest. And with this middle vertice, let's merge this by center. With this loop cut in the center, we want to press X and let's dissolve vertice. That's perfect. We can dissolve the vertice. Let's press 2 on our number pad, select this face, and let's insert. Now that's looking a little bit better. And then we can insert once again, and then we can extrude backwards. That's looking very, very nice. And you know, that already is our little design. Now with that done, we can do the same thing by adding a bezel. With this bezel added, we can have the amount of around 15. We can have the segment, not too many segments, around 5 will probably do. But just with the bezel, if I shade smooth this, it actually looks okay. And at a later stage, we could change things if we really wanted to. We could even get rid of this archway, or get rid of the rear, you know, we could get rid of this door at the archway if we wanted to at a later stage, simply by deleting face, you know. A lot of things would be possible from here, but this is our basic design in a sense. This is what we're working with. And because it's going to be a scene, click on your plane, and with the rear, as you can see, press number 2 on our number pad, click the edge at the rear, and we want to extrude by pressing E and Z to extrude. This is going to be part of our scene. Click that loop once again, or the edge, and press Ctrl-B, and from here we can simply bezel. We can bezel this by any amount, you know, but ideally we want it to be somewhat smooth, kind of like that. And shade smooth for now. Shade smooth for now. We'll see what it looks like at the end. Now with our background of our scene, let's just continue to edit this somewhat. So what we can do next with this backdrop is that we can go into shader, create a new material, and let's delete this principle right there. Press X and delete, and let's press Shift A, and let's add, I want to add a new emission shader. So if we go to shader, we got emission shader right there. That's perfect. And let's plug that into surface. And then we can literally control the strength of how powerful this light in the background will be. This light will be quite essential. Now in the top left down corner, you can see if I go to the top left down corner, I can it actually, my mouse sort of turns into this 4-hour object. If I right click and sort of drag that along, it creates a new viewport for myself. With this viewport, this can be our camera view, our render view. This is what our render view looks like, but I believe this is in Eevee, so let's go to our render tab, render properties, change it from Eevee to cycles, and change the device from CPU to GPU. And that's already looking amazing. Let's save this, but let's continue to save our documents in increments. Now, something else we can do, of course, we'll need to do this. It's quite essential. We need to add a camera. So let's press Shift A. But before we can add a camera, let's actually add an empty. Let's add an empty to our location. So if we add an empty to our location, let it be a cube, and press GZ and move this upward. We want it to control the camera essentially. Right there, we can then add a camera. We add a camera, press G, Z, move this upwards, and press G, Y, move this backwards. Now with our camera added, we've moved it back a little bit. What we can do on the left hand side is press 0. We get our camera view from there. On the right hand side, with our camera selected, we can press R, Z, and rotate it to face towards our object. Get it a little bit centered, kind of like that. That's pretty good. And obviously press number 3 on our number pad. We obviously need to move this upward. We need to once again rotate it upwards. So R, X, and we can rotate it upwards, kind of like that. But right now, as I always say, save in increments. Remember to save your files. Now with the camera, we actually want to change it a little bit. We perhaps need the Y angle, the resolution. If we go into our cameras tab, this is the camera output for format. You can change the resolution. And with the resolution X, we can bring that down to 1200. With the resolution Y, it's 1400. Now that would be more suitable for social media. But if you wanted to, you can even bring this up a little bit more to around 1600 for the resolution Y. That's even looking better. And you can bring this forward by pressing G, Y, and simply bringing this forward just a little bit. And that's already looking good. And that's our render on the left hand side. Save and increment. So you've got your camera set up, you've got the product basic design. Now this empty object, we want to parent our camera with this empty, and we can select them both simply by pressing right click and going down to parent object. So whenever I move my empty object, now we want to parent the camera to our empty object by selecting the camera, then selecting the empty object, and then simply by pressing right click and parent to object. With the empty selected, this should rotate the camera. That's perfect. In fact, that would make a pretty awesome animation if I think about it. And in our second tutorial, we will be working on that animation. So save your documents once again, and we can think about our next step of our design. Now the next thing we want to do is continue adding our details. Promise you this will look a lot better after it's finished. Now we can add some water to our environment, or at least it will appear as water. So what we can do is press Shift A and add another plane, and let's scale this up probably by 10. Now with the new plane added and our background, we can actually move this downwards just a little bit. And with our new plane added, we can even scale this up a little bit more, because it needs to come into the view of our camera. That looks a little bit better. Press G and Z and move it upwards, but only by a little bit. You can see there at the back it does go through the object. We can press G, Y, and move this outwards, but it's not essential, to be honest with you. It can stay exactly where it is. But if you want to scale this down on the y-axis, you could, and just move it forward ever so slightly. That should do fine for now. Let's save our documents. My favorite thing to do. Now with our new plane, we can go into shader. We can create a new material. And with this material, you can simply call this water. Name it water, just like that. Now, you should probably enable Node Wrangler. This is really going to help. You can go to the edit button at the top, go to preferences, go to add-ons, and add on Node Wrangler. This would really help with this preset. With the principal selected, we can press Control T, and this is already looking better. With the image texture selected, this image texture, we actually need a noise texture. If I'm being completely honest, we need a noise texture for this section. So we can actually delete this image texture, and we can press Shift A, search, and just type in noise texture. I've already got one selected right there. For the mapping, select the vector into vector, and for our color, we can actually put this into normal. And you'll quickly see how it's going to help transform our scene essentially. This is still what our scene looks like. So under texture coordinator, change the UV to vector to object to vector. We also need to add in a bump node. So once again, Shift A, and we can search for a bump node. I've already got a bump right there, and I'll just drop it in between. So from here, we can change the color to normal and use height instead, and you can see it's already given itself quite a bit of a detail. And we can change the distance of that. We can even change the scale. It all depends on how wavy we want this to be. For now, we're just gonna work with this. Now, roughness is quite important. So with the noise texture, we can actually bring the roughness down. You don't have to bring it down entirely, but it would help with what we're trying to do. And once again, scale it in a little bit. We want it to be wavy, but not too wavy, almost like a storm in the dead of the night in the middle of the ocean, but it's a calm storm. You know, it's a distance calm storm. I don't know if that makes sense. But again, even on our principal shader, we want to turn the reference down again. You know, this would help. And then you can see that does make quite a bit of a difference. It's almost like it's looking like porridge. Like for a moment, you know, you're really in the matrix. But also be careful with this, because what we don't want to be interfering too much is our background. We don't want our background to be interfering too much with what we have going on. So we can bring this down even a little bit more. We don't want it to be interfering with our water surface, you know, preferably at all. So bring this down until you're comfortable with that, and you can even scale this up a little bit more. Now, just to finish this out, you can go to the transition and you can turn the weight up. You can see it really does go from dark to a white kind of tint. And from there on, we can go to the base color, and you can really choose any colors you like. You can go with green, you can go with a light blue, you can go with red, purple, different shades of purple. But for this tutorial, we perhaps want to stick with the blue, almost like some sort of baby blue. Now that's looking real. That's looking actually quite nice. Now let's go back to layout, and from layout you can clearly see that it's looking excellent. You know, it's really looking excellent. You can, if you don't like to see the grid in your viewport on the render, you can select everything and you can press G and Z, and you can even move this up a little bit, so mostly so that we don't have to deal with that detail. Now what's really incredible is that, you know, what we can add from here. Now back to our environment, do we want to delete this face that we sort of created? Do we want to delete this face? And with this archway, we can select the entire loop, and we can sort of press G, Y, and we can sort of extrude this archway. We can probably even scale it down. There are so many options, you know, available to us that we can experiment with. You know, this is just one of those options, but it's not the one you have to go with. And with our scene, we can actually add more lighting. So let's press Shift A. Let's go to lighting. Let's add an area light. Let's press G, Z. Let's move this upwards. Let's press G, Y. Let's move it backwards just a little bit. This is roughly where it's placed, aligned with our object. I like to keep everything very symmetrical. very in order. With this, we can go to our right hand tab, we can go down to our light unit, and we can essentially change the power outage to around 500 just to give us something to start with. Press R and X and rotate this and point it at our object, and let's see what differences that makes. Now, I don't think I like the differences so far. I think we might need to scale it upwards, but the problem is, because there's so much lighting already, it's almost as if it doesn't need that, in a weird way, believe it or not, in a very weird way. But then what we can do is simply add some more stuff to our environment if we wanted to. You know, we've got this archway, but what else can we add to our archway? We can probably add some cubes, and we can scale these cubes outwards, scale them upwards, and move them out of the ground. And we can, you know, these are sort of like our monoliths, you know, move them backwards and move it to the right hand side. Yeah, this is like a monolith, if that makes any sense. And you can duplicate this and add it to the left hand side also. And there you have it. You have two monoliths, and you can scale this outwards even a little bit more and move it upwards a little bit more, and you have two monoliths in your environments, kind of like that. But you know, this can always be adjusted. So it's a watery environment, you know, but it's definitely looking good. You can even scale these outwards even more if you wanted to. But I think the monoliths on their own, kind of like that actually looks pretty nice. It's just a simple environment, but you know, it's amazing what you can do with simple shapes. But what this might help us do is to simply add more detail to our scene. You know, we want more lighting, essentially, especially on our platform. If you can notice, there's not a lot of lighting on our platform, so we can probably improve that a little bit simply by moving around the lighting and increasing the lighting. Let's try 3000. Now, instantly, you can see that makes an instant difference. And you know, that's what I was looking for, you know, a huge difference. That's what I was looking for. And it's really looking good. If you don't like the water, you can always change that. If it's, you know, if it's too bright, if it's not bright enough, you know, that can always be changed, you know, to something of your preference. And of course, if this background light is too much, you can always click on that and bring the brightness down just a little bit. You know, we don't want it to overshadow our scene. You know, we want to control that very deliberately. What I've also begun to experiment with is the spread of my light. You know, on the right hand corner, you know, we can really adjust the spread, and we can add some shadow if we wanted to. You know, the sky's the limit on this attempt. You know, it's really anything we wanted. And the light unit, it could also be whatever you want, to be honest. You know, we can really create some surreal environments with Blender. That's what's fantastic. And it's just simple shapes. That's all it is, just simple shapes. But as you can see, the spread does make quite a difference. Now, if you were to rotate this, you can see it would affect quite a lot. So later in the animation, in episode 2, we can probably, you know, experiment with the lighting and the camera movements a little bit more. Speaking of the camera, I actually want the camera to be a little bit more portrait. So with the resolution on Y, we can actually move this up quite a bit. We can even move it up to probably 900, I would say. While that might look crazy, I think it will work particularly well, especially for like social media purposes. Now, if you want to control the lighting, the background lighting indifferently, what we can do is actually separate the lighting below. Separate this face by pressing P to separate and tab out and separate and click on it. Once you click on it, this one, you can actually, you know, make this one, change. For one, what you have to remember is that it already has an emission. So it's almost as if we kind of have to create a new emissions for this particular reason, and we can just create a new material essentially and scale the power up once again. But with this now, what this allows us to do is to have more control of the underneath. You can see how simple we change it to a little bit of a green, and immediately that's added some crazy amount of detail to our overall design. You can have a black view or a dark blue, but it could be whatever you want. But this way we can have the control of two different lighting effects, the background light and the underneath, the water light. There's the water and then there's the water light. It's almost like it's two different things. I'm not gonna lie, I'm actually liking this green. It's not too green, but it's not too crazy. But I'm excited to see what you're gonna do with this idea, or with this design concept. I'm really excited and looking forward to see what you're going to create. Obviously, if you wanted to go with a baby blue, I'm really sort of like, I think it could look good with baby blue, depending on the product that we go with at the end. But we're gonna see. We're gonna see what turns out to be. So first simple thing that we can probably edit is our cap. So if we look at this cap, we want to create a new material for it. Let's go into our shader and let's click on new, and we can call this cap with all caps turned on. Ironic, but it's on. And from here we can sort of, I do want it to be rather transparent. So obviously with the transmission we can turn that all the way up. Essentially you can see it's having this weird kind of glass effect. I've turned the roughness down quite a lot, but you don't have to turn it down all the way. It's more in your preference. It's just to give it a soft look. But if I click on my base color, then we can also affect the value. The value is quite important. You can tab in as well, click in the value, and you can change this to like a 2 or even like a 3. And then with our object, we can tab in and press A to select all, and Control N. Control N simply resets all normals. So it says in the left hand corner, recalculated normals. And that should help our design to look a bit more authentic. So it does indeed look more authentic. It's perfectly see-through. And not sure that's entirely what we want. We can always move the roughness up just a little bit to give it a bit more detail. And to make things easier, in the render tab we can enable denoise for viewport. That would probably help a lot. And I don't need my max render to be too much, probably 400. We could even go with 300. It's really up to you, but you can see the cap is starting to take a little bit of a shape. Now with the IOR, we can change that as well. We can either lower it, and you can see how it affects the object to give it this icy kind of portfolio, or this icy kind of profile, and that might not be what you want. So it's all about just experimenting to really see what works best for you. And that's what our object is looking like so far. That is honestly what it's looking like so far. It's looking rather clean. But with the cap, we can always edit this once again. If we find that it needs a bit of work, we can always change this once again. We can even turn down the brightness if we'd like. That part is is pretty much in our control. We can turn the IOR up if you want to give it a bit more of a glossy kind of look. This is where we really get to have a lot of fun. We can see that the roughness tends to have a lot of control over the entire object. So that is something that we need to be mindful with, I would say, just to manage our expectations with that. But you know, just have a play around with the IOR, the roughness, to find something that suits your purpose. And this is looking good for me so far. So I'm going to save the incremental. Now the next thing is obviously giving our actual object some details. And you can see it's quite far off the platform, so we can select all of this and we can simply bring this down a little bit, not too much, just so we got it, you know, sitting somewhere around there. That I'm quite happy with. Now with the main object selected, we can then go to shader, we can create a new material, and we can call this the bottle and save that. And with the principle selected, we can press Ctrl T, and we get all our other texture coordination, mapping, and image texture. Then we can add an image texture. We can add a label from here on out. Once you click open, you can then add a label. I can choose from a number of images that I can add. I already have a design prepared, and you know, you can use Photoshop, you can use Figma, you can use Adobe XD to create something like this, something that would make a lot of sense, and it'd be rather easy from here. Now I've got my image added, and obviously it doesn't fully look correct. So if we go back to our layout, we can go and tab in on this, and then we can select the top loop. We want to select the top loop and right click and mark a seam. And it's the same thing with the bottom loop. Select the entire thing and mark a seam. And with the back, we want to select one of these. We can select one of these edges and mark a seam with those as well. Now, even easier, our image is already added. We can go to UV editor. We can select all by pressing A, and my design has popped up because I've already added it. I've added it in our shaders. And with this, I can simply press unwrap. And let's not forget, if I tab in and I've got everything selected, I can press Shift N and recalculate normals, just in case. We just want to make sure that everything is good on that front. And if we go back into our UV editor, we can then continue with our object. So we've got everything selected, or at least we want this face selected. So if I select the group of faces around my objects right there, we can press U and we can unwrap. And there we have it. On the left hand side, we can press A, and then what we can simply do is press G and move this along. And there we have it. We're starting to get an idea of what it is that's going on here. So from here, we clearly need to rotate this. So we can rotate this around 90 degrees, and then we can press S to scale this out, press S and X to scale this. So you can see when it's scaled out like that, this is roughly what it looks like. You can scale it out even a little bit more on the y-axis. This actually looks okay. What we really need to do is just press G and Y and just bring this down so it's looking almost a bit more center. We don't want it to look too much out of place. So like I said, yes, I already have something designed for this purpose, but you know, if you don't have anything designed for this purpose, then you could always work on something. Now with our cap, we can hide that, and we can always edit how this look. If you don't like how this looks, you can always select the loop cut and you can always edit this in. You can almost select all of these faces, in fact, and with these you can simply scale them in, and you can press G and you can bring them downwards. And that doesn't look too bad, of course. So we can then bring our bring our cap back, and that's probably looking a little bit better. And that's really and truly a basic design of our objects, if I'm being completely honest. But if we go back into shader, do we get to adjust this a little bit more? Now, key thing is that within our shader, we can always change the label, but when I'm exporting my label, I choose to remove the backgrounds when I'm exporting my labels just to help out with options. I can always then choose what to do. It can make my life a lot easier, and it just adds flexibility into your work process essentially. Now, next up, we can add in a color ramp. So if I shift A, we can go to search and we can add in a color ramp, and we want to put our color ramp around here. Now, what I've done is also add in my color from my image into the normal output. And this is going to give us a lot of control, because what we can do from here is essentially add a bump. We can press Shift A and we can go to search and we can add a bump, and we can drop this right here. And you can see already it's given our work a little bit of a... So the amazing thing with our color ramp is then obviously we've got two different shades of color right here that we can choose from. With the black one selected, we can then bring the brightness upwards, and you can see instantly our color of our objects turns to white. We can then change this to our liking. We can have it a light purple. We can have any and everything from here on out. This is how you essentially change the color of your object, which is why I like to export my labels in with transparency, with the background in transparency. Now, with the word, that's the words that are written, I think we can probably give this like it could actually work out in our favor. Now, there we have an example, but of course, if pink doesn't work well with your environment, this is something you can always change to improve your overall environment. Of course, you can change the colors to reflect that of your environment, so feel free to experiment. This is the stage where you kind of get to have all the fun you want to have with your Blender project after doing some impressive work to design this project. So this is the final render that I'm going with. We can render this image in portrait and landscape. To render it in landscape, to make that easier, we can actually expand our monoliths. If that helps, you can tab in to our monoliths. You can press Alt Z to get X-ray mode, one on our number pad, and with these edges, with these vertices, we can essentially press G and X and scale these out to the very edges of our object. So then you can essentially render this image in both landscape and portrait without affecting the overall platform too much. And with the lighting, of course, like I said, you can rotate this to affect the lighting in different ways. You can also duplicate this lighting, and you can move this around. You can always move this lighting around, and you can always increase that lighting. You can always change the color of the lighting also, to give it different colors, such as a pink scene, as we're working with a pink scene. But this will probably do just fine. So let me know what you think about this scene. Next thing we're going to be doing is animating this project. Let's save our documents. This is going to be a running joke on the channel, saving your documents. I will imprint that into your brain so you do not forget. I'll promise you that. We created a product, now it's time to animate it. So let's get started. Now, first thing we actually want to do is to get our objects selected, and we actually want to parent these objects. We want to parent these objects because when we're animating, we don't want them to be moving around too much. So with our objects selected, we want to make sure that our objects all move at once together. And in order to do that, we must parent them. So I got them selected like this. We can simply press Control P, and we can get set to parent object. So we can set our objects to keep transform. That way, when we simply move this up, we got it rotated. Everything sort of sticks together. Let's set origin to geometry also. And like I said, this way it just it makes a lot more sense for us when we're animating. The timeline, we can actually bring this upward so we can see it a little bit more, a little bit clearer. And from here, where do we want to go from here? We want to animate it, right? So for one, do we want to animate our object going up, or do we want our animation to go down? We want it to go up because we're starting from down. So it's very important to understand, of course, how many frames we want. It's a simple animation, so perhaps 100 frames would do fine. Sometimes when I'm working with simple animations, I'll start with just 100 frames. So we can press I to insert. We can press I to insert a keyframe for location, rotation, and scale. And then if we move this to around 50 frames, we can then press G, Z, move the object upwards, and rotate the axis, rotate it on the Z axis. And from here, what we can essentially do, actually, from here we don't want it to be rotated. We don't want it to go up too much, so we can bring this back down just a little bit, and we can press I to insert. Now, if we go to around 90 on our timeline, we can then bring this up even more, not a lot, and then we can simply rotate this on the x-axis, tilt it a little bit forward, and then we can rotate it again on the y-axis, tilt it to the right just a little bit. These are all coming down to preference, of course. And if you'd like, you can rotate it once again, so press R and Z, but Z once again, and rotate it so the letters come back to face you just a little bit. And this is sort of like just adding a finishing touch, and then press I, and everything is in our keyframe. So that's a crazy animation, but it is so simple. Okay, so from here on out, the only thing I've changed in my output is the location of where I'll be saving my frames, 100 frames. I've created a new folder specifically for that, and I've saved it in that folder. So wherever my animations go, they'll go specifically to my frames folder. Now in the render tab, we can then choose how much max samples we want to render this by. We can go to 1,000 max samples. A lot of people do a lot less. In terms of noise threshold, we can probably try 0.1, and we can just check for ourselves to see how long it will take to render that. If it's taking you too long, try 0.2. Try 0.2 in your noise threshold, and that usually brings down the render time by a lot in my experience. But when you're also rendering, remember to not be in the render, you know, in the render mode, because that's something that I think everyone sort of forgets sometimes, is that when you're rendering, turn this thing off. Go to solid view on both of your windows, save your documents, and let's save an incremental. And then you can render your animation by simply going to render animation. And the lovely thing about this is that it will save my animation exactly where I told it to, which is exactly what I wanted in the first place. So that has really been it. I hope you enjoyed this video on creating your first project, your first Blender digital product, and designing it and animating it. I hope you enjoyed this video. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to see more. Leave a like, leave a comment. And of course, join the community and let me know if I should create a Discord server. A Discord server will really keep us connected. This way I can help you with projects and you can help me with projects. It'll be fun. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in our next video.